Dance Army here on BBC Two at 7:30. But first, the summer-long festival continues with Algar's cello concerto among the highlights. Katie Derham brings us Proms Extra.
It's the return of the Magnificent Seven. That's 7 whole weeks of Proms Extra. Tonight it's all about contemplation, paradise and spirituality as we worship with Elgar, Foray and a gospel prom for good measure. Please, take a pew. Hello and welcome to Proms Extra. We are the dashing consort to the very regal Proms, and the majestic prom season opened with a poignant tribute. What a first week. And the Proms has more in store for you over the next 7 weeks. Just stay with us. Now, I couldn't do this show alone, and why would I? Joining me here in our studio in the Royal College of Music tonight are 3 distinguished guests. First up, a guest who has been doing her own orchestral manoeuvres. Last year, she launched her own orchestra, and last week she played in the first of 3 Proms with the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. She really does love orchestras. It's welcome back to Proms Extra family member Chichi Nwanoku. For more than 4 decades, this gentleman was one of the world's leading cellists until 2014, when he retired from performing due to a neck injury. He's still very much involved with music, working tirelessly in education and as principal of the Birmingham Conservatoire. Oh, and did you know he got the very first licence to busk in the London Underground? No, neither did I. Welcome to Julian Lloyd-Webber. Our next guest made headlines last year when he left his role as General Director of Glyndebourne Opera to take on perhaps one of the toughest jobs in broadcasting, becoming Director of the BBC Proms. Consequently, everybody around here wants to be his friend for some strange reason. It's a big hello to David Pickard. And performing at the end of the show is an emerging new talent who we reckon will be getting his own invitation to perform at the Proms in the not-too-distant future. Stay tuned to see a performance by 17-year-old Sheku Kani Mason, who has just finished his AS levels and also happens to be the winner of BBC Young Musician 2016. So welcome to all of you. Lovely to see you here for our first Proms Extra of the season. Chichi, you've had an extremely busy year, I know.
It's been multi-busy, with fortunately a fantastic array of different practices, not just playing the double bass.
And Julian, this is your old stomping ground. You're a student here at the Royal College,
yes,
aren't you?
Was, yes.
And if
not
the walls
much,
could talk, what would they say about the young Julian?
I'm not going to tell you that. But I'm having, I miss playing a lot, but I have to say I don't have much time to miss it up at Birmingham. It's an extraordinary job and I'm, really loving it there.
That's wonderful news. Absolutely fantastic. And David, an extraordinary first week for you as Director of the Proms. Wonderful variety, but also a very key decision. You had to make a decision on the very first night to make a big change to the programming, to put in the tribute to the victims of Nice.
Yes, I mean, it wasn't the way I expected the first concert of my first season to start, but, I woke up with everybody else on Friday morning to hear that terrible news. And, I think this is a moment when music can speak louder than words. And, to play the Marseillaise without any introduction and for everybody around the world to understand what that meant is the wonderful thing that music can do.
And it was extraordinary in the hall. Everybody was on their feet immediately. It was very moving, I thought. So
I think that
Very
really does
well
show the
judged.
power of music, that it can really bring people together in that incredible way, maybe like nothing else can.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to our discussions this evening, so don't hold back. Thank you for being here. Well, without further ado, let us dive into the deep ocean that is the first night of the Proms. And after that tribute to the Nice victims, it began lovingly with Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet Overture, one of several Proms in the season that will be marking the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. Closing the first night was Prokofiev's commanding Alexander Nevsky, and neatly sandwiched between the two and launching the first of many Proms cello performances in this season was Elgar's Cello Concerto. What is it about this work, Julian, that makes it resonate so much with audiences and
I think
critics?
perhaps it's one of the tests of a great piece of music, that it can take very, very many different interpretations. And I feel that very strongly about the Elgar. I found it an incredibly responsive work to different moods and different situations, different concert halls, different audiences, different conductors. Although I probably played it more than any other concerto, it really was always different. And I think that that's one of the great qualities about this work. It can be, in fact, Elgar himself said, when he first heard Pablo Casals play it, he said, "I never knew my music could sound so international." No one was ever quite sure whether that was a compliment, but it does show that the work can be played in very many different ways. And I actually very much liked Sol Gabbetta's performance. Especially in the reflective passages, the slow movement I thought was absolutely beautiful. She did some very clever things with this Royal Albert Hall acoustic, because one of the problems for the cello, of course, is that it can only play to a certain volume. It's not a trumpet, it's not even a violin that soars above the orchestra. So you can't do too much of fortissimo in the Albert Hall, which is the big temptation, because you want such a big hall, you want to absolutely play out all the time. But she really did her pianissimos, and that's what you have to do. You have to draw, I think, the listeners in.
Well, let's listen to that performance from the first night. This is the Argentinian rising star, Sol Gabetta, making her Proms debut. With a flourish there, Sol Gabetta playing Elgar's Cello Concerto. And the cello is firmly in the spotlight in this season's Proms. No fewer than 10 cello concertos being performed. Chichi, was that a good choice for the first night?
Oh, absolutely perfect choice. I mean, you know where you are with this piece. I mean, I know it was really interesting to hear that quote from Elgar, because I associate this piece with Jacques Dupre and English performances and English countryside and everything that looks and sounds English. But actually, of course it's everybody's piece in a way. And
yeah, people say that it got off to a slow start, but all the big international cellists, they did play it. Casals, and then of course Tortelier, Fournier, Rostropovich played it several times. I mean, they all had to play it.
which is a mark of it being a great piece, and all those, because all those great players want to play it. So, and they happen to come from all over the world.
And David, what did you think of Sol's performance?
Well, I thought it was wonderful. I mean, and getting back to this thing about what makes a great piece of music, what strikes me as interesting at the moment is that Elgar, which, we've always associated with sort of English conductors and English soloists, is now a favourite of all those international conductors. So, I mean, we haven't talked about Sakari Oramo, who conducted it so beautifully, and the Elgar symphonies that I've heard him do at the Barbican are just sublime. And I think to have a Finnish conductor and an Argentinian soloist, and later on we've got a Spanish conductor coming conducting Elgar, it's really become something which is which the world owns and not just this country.
Now, I know that most of this, or much of this season was programmed before you started, but David, are you delighted to see the cello in the spotlight this year?
I am, yes. I mean, I was a very poor, very, very poor amateur cellist myself.
See, I've heard that you still play.
I have to say my speciality is playing Saint-Saëns' The Swan with an orange. I think that gives you an idea of just the... You're frowning. I think you can see what it does to the strings.
What's that do to the orange?
Oh, well, no, it's a wonderful smell when you play it. So I was very much a sort of party animal cellist rather than a serious one. But I love the instrument, and everybody loves the cello, I think. And I confess, I inherited 2 or 3 new cello concertos, and my predecessor said to me, you've got an option here. You can either, not put any more cello concertos in or add a few more.
I think the great thing you've done is not do all the same old ones. You've got how many new
We have, I think, altogether 5
That's
musical
terrific.
concertos,
That's
and we
really
have,
good.
and as you say, the other nice thing is that the majority of the rest are from the 20th or 21st century.
Yeah.
So, you know, the cello is the fact that so many people are writing for the cello just goes to show how much inspiration it gives composers as well as performers.
And you can continue to relive Elgar's cello concerto and the first night of the Proms for many more nights or mornings, whichever takes your fancy, by going to the BBC Proms website and the BBC iPlayer. And if you didn't already know, the Proms isn't just about listening and going to concerts. There are talks, there are singing sessions, films, lots of opportunities to be involved with the Proms season. And David, presumably, participation in classical music is a really big thing for you, something you want to develop.
It's key to me. I mean, the whole principle behind the Proms about bringing the best of classical music to the widest possible audience is, I think, still as true today as it was in 1895. And we've just all got to think about what that widest audience is. And participation is one brilliant way, I think, of getting young people engaged with classical music. Things like the 10 Pieces Project, which has had, you know, contributions from all around the country from young people. I mean, I spoke to somebody last night and she was talking so enthusiastically about Zadok the Priest and the piece they created around it. And it's really a brilliant way of people discovering our world for the first time.
Julian, you're 10 Pieces ambassador, I believe.
Yes, I am.
So...
And I think those 2 films are absolutely brilliant. I just wish that they would get shown on sort of BBC One at peak time, because they deserve to be. They deserve to be. They're brilliant, brilliant films.
And Chichi, I know you and I have spent a lot of time with amateur orchestras over the last few months, and we have seen firsthand how many people do love playing. I was rather stunned to hear that there are more than 800 amateur orchestras in the UK.
I couldn't believe it. And to think that so many of them came forward and wanted to be part of this. And the orchestras, as we discovered, they don't even audition to get into the orchestra. If they turn up, they're welcome. And putting themselves forward for this series has been something where they want to expand their game and up their game, and it's just been absolutely fabulous.
And I should say, just in case you didn't know, gentlemen, this is a new series called All Together Now, an amateur orchestra competition coming to the BBC very soon. It's my plug over for that. But it was a really good example, I think, of, as you say, how participation is happening already, but all the more should be encouraged, especially with young people. Well, if you fancy doing something different, why not take part in the BBC's Get Playing initiative? Now, Get Playing aims to inspire amateur musicians across the UK to pick up an instrument and learn it, or reacquaint yourself with it if you've dumped it under the bed, put it in the attic. I know that happens a lot. It certainly did with me. You can go to bbc.co.uk/getplaying to find out more, and you too could join the BBC Virtual Orchestra. Even I'm having a go. Be warned. Talking of playing, we have a performance still to come by the cellist Sheku Kanu Mason, which you will not want to miss. Plus, we've got a look at Fauré's Requiem and the welcome return of Chord of the Week with David Owen Norris. Now, the Proms has no fewer than 75 concerts taking place across the season inside the Royal Albert Hall alone. That's a lot of noise. You, the audience at home or listening on Radio 3, have some of the best seats in the house when it comes to experiencing the sounds from those concerts. But what if you're sitting in the velvet seats or standing in the gallery or the arena of the Royal Albert Hall? With our ear to the ground, the wall and the ceiling, Proms Extra went to find out what it takes to make the hall come alive with the sound of music.
The thing about acoustics is if it's right, you kind of don't notice it's there. It supports the orchestra, it makes the music sound more beautiful. But when it's wrong, when there's an echo or you can hear background noise, or it's too dry, if it's wrong, you kind of just know.
I think at figure 5, the quavers are a bit too soft in the orchestra. We really need them.
Every venue has its own challenges. It's our job as the promoters of concerts to work out how you get that best experience. So in the general rehearsal, a conductor will be experimenting with the acoustics, experimenting with balance, making it all work. You also want to have somebody in the audience chairs listening to that rehearsal saying, well, maybe the brass should come down there a bit too loud, or we need to look at the orchestral layout. If you have the horn players near a hard surface, of course the horns blow backwards, so their sound then reflects as it's meant to off a hard surface and comes forward, but depending on where they're sitting it can be too loud. If you work in a venue regularly, you choose the pieces that will work best in there. So you wouldn't want to play very fast music or sort of modern minimalist music in a very reverberant church because it would get lost in the venue.
Anechoic chamber have walls, floors and ceiling that completely absorb the sound, and that means when you play in there, the sound goes straight from the instrument to the microphone and you hear no reflections. The anechoic chamber gives us a sense of what happens when you take all the reverberation away. It's certainly not what you would want from a concert hall. In contrast, you have the reverberation chamber where you get that lovely blooming of the sound. But that's too reverberant and everything turns into a mush. So actually the ideal concert venue is somewhere between the anechoic and the reverberation chamber here. Modern acoustic science has given us quite precise details of what an acoustic should be like. So you need this reverberance when you can hear the sound lingering for a couple of seconds in the space before dying away. But that's going on all the time. The biggest change to the acoustic of the Albert Hall was in the 1960s, where they brought the mushrooms in to block off the dome. And the sound from the dome otherwise would be reflected and echoed back onto the audience, and you'd hear multiple trumpets playing, multiple singers, and that's what those mushrooms hanging from the ceiling are there to do. Modern acoustic science has shown that we split into two rough groups. So there's people who like real clarity, where all the detail of the music is obvious. For them, it's best to sit somewhere near the front of the hall so they don't get too much reverberance and they can really pick out all the detail. But there's another group of people who like to be enveloped in this wash of reverberation, and for them it's better to be maybe up on the first gallery, where you're hearing more of the room and less of this distinct clarity.
What we want the audience to have is a fantastic experience at the concert, to hear really good music played fantastically and to be thrilled by the experience of hearing live music.
Wonderful final smile from Zachary Aramo there, wasn't it? Gigi, when you're playing in a new venue, what are you hoping for in the acoustic?
A response, a personal response, and because, of course, every time you touch the string, you want to know that you're making the most beautiful sound possible, and you get an immediate sensation of, oh, my sound is only going that far, or you get a feel back from the room and you want to know how you can fill that room. But I'm always very aware how it sounds quite different when you're on your own on a stage, which I do sometimes walk on before everybody else gets there. And then when everybody else gets there, of course, you can't always tell how you sound. But I remember in the old festival hall feeling quite terrified in concerts because you felt as though you were all on your own, which is great in one way because you can really hear what you're doing. But if you're not very experienced, you can be quite terrified because you think, oh my God, everyone can hear what I'm doing in amongst an orchestra.
So as a member of the audience in the Royal Festival Hall, did that mean that they were able to really clearly pick out individual instruments?
I think they don't, actually,
No,
not
you don't
necessarily,
think
but
so?
I think you yourself...
Julian's shaking his head.
I think you yourself can feel... Yeah.
But it's, I mean, you're absolutely right. It was and still is a very strange feeling on that platform because you do feel alone. You feel you can only really hear yourself, but in the audience, it doesn't sound like that at all. And I actually think the festival hall's a good concert hall because I think it makes people kind of up their game. It's so critical that I've some of the best performances of my life I've heard there.
And I think also there's, we're talking about acoustics, but atmosphere, as you were saying, Chichi, is a crucial part of it. I think the Albert Hall is a very good case in point. I mean, the Albert Hall is not the perfect acoustic for every type of music, but blimey, is it a fantastic atmosphere in that hall, whatever you're hearing.
It's amazing, is it? Actually, if you play solo on stage, you would think, a cello would get completely lost in a 6,000-seater. Actually, it fills the hall. It's a beautiful, beautiful sound.
But you're right, those smaller groups of instruments. Last year I went and actually prommed up in the gallery for John Eliot Gardner's Orfeo. I thought, well, this would be interesting to see whether you can hear Monteverdi with a handful of instruments way, way up there. Came absolutely pinging across. So we shouldn't always think the Albert Hall is only good for big things. It can be fantastic.
And it's a wonderful feeling when you walk on in that place, a sort of sense of history of everyone that's walked on that stage, from from Frank Sinatra and all those people, as well as all the great classical musicians. Everyone's been on there,
The thing about atmosphere and acoustic, I think they're also linked to the visual aspect of being in a concert hall. And there are some halls in the world where the audiences are completely blacked out. And for me, I find that completely unhelpful because I truly believe it's a communicative experience for both sides. And in the Albert Hall, of course, you can see. I don't want to. Of course, they need to be slightly dimmer, but the highlight is the performance. But you need to know they're there, Julian.
Yeah, it does help if somebody turns up. But I used to feel the Albert Hall was so big that you couldn't really take everybody in. It was sometimes it felt a little bit like playing at home, because you can't take in that number of people. Whereas if you're playing in a small room and all your friends and family are there, it can actually be more nerve-wracking.
That's intimidating. Yes.
Well, the Proms is going to go out to the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse, the beautiful indoor theatre at the Globe, which is an exquisite little gem of a theatre, isn't it? Part of your Proms at programme. Was that an acoustic decision?
Well, not primarily. It was more about thinking about places where we could put music in different settings, where somehow the setting and the music might have a connection. And I suppose Shakespeare and the Globe and the beautiful programme Purcell with a small group of instruments is kind of a gift in this anniversary year. Peckham Car Park is probably something slightly different. You wouldn't necessarily want to hear every piece of music in that car park. But actually, with that concrete around it, that very enclosed sound, also, I mean, Gigi, you've been there.
I played there. I played the I can't pronounce it, the Harmonière, the John Adams. It was absolutely the most... When I arrived, I thought, what have I agreed to do here? I had to park my car and then go round and round and round with my bass and my stool to the top floor. And when I got there, it was the most fantastic atmosphere. And I think I was the oldest person there because I saw lots of people. The rest of the orchestra were all the same age as my children. I could see them looking at me thinking, what's she doing here? But actually, as soon as we started playing, it was great.
And just before we leave the subject of acoustics, Julian, when you were busking in the tube, how did that sound?
Oh, yeah, that was an interesting one. I must say, I played in so many extraordinary places. I never did the Peckham Car Park. I'm regretting it now. Yeah.
Well, let's turn now from sound to matters of spirituality and eternal rest, courtesy of the French composer Gabriel Fauré, and one of his best-known works, the Requiem. In short, it's a piece about solace, comfort, and the notion that one shouldn't look upon death with fear, but, as Fauré saw it, as a joyful delivery, a yearning for the happiness of the beyond. Now, Chi-Chi, you played in this prom as the double bassist of the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, and it was a very special performance, I felt.
It was, and also, I don't think it was announced, but we were all told beforehand that we were going to play it as a tribute to those who lost their lives recently in Nice. And so that's something that was very personal. And I always find this Requiem a very personal experience, unlike Berlioz and the Verdi, which are much more sort of bold and macho and loud and bigger sound. This one, especially with this early version of it without violins, my dear friend and colleague Annette Isserlis calls it, because it's just, the only strings are violas, cellos and basses, she calls it the 70% chocolate version. And it's very, very warm and touching, and everybody has a very unique, singular space to express themselves, and and as you say, that the Fauré's feeling of it being more of a joyful deliverance rather than a sort of doom and gloom, death and the end of it all, ending with In Paradisium, what paradise could be like. It could be very happy.
Well, let's have a listen to the choir of King's College, Cambridge, and the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, and the baritone Roderick Williams, right now. Shown on BBC4 last Sunday, that was Fauré's Requiem, conducted by Stephen Kleber and serenely performed by the choir of King's College, Cambridge, and Roderick Williams, accompanied by the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment It is the most beautiful piece.
It's quite fascinating, actually, because we just did the Verdi Requiem up in Birmingham, and I got to know it really well, and it's so different. It's kind of opera. It's really opera, and this is a much more intimate, small scale. It's otherworldly. It's heavenly, really. I think it's an absolutely fantastic piece.
And yet it was, in some ways, quite a departure, wasn't it, for Fauré at the time? Beforehand, he hadn't really written such a big work.
Yes, it's a big scale work for Fauré, who's very well known as a miniaturist, but I mean, he certainly handles it well. Although, of course, you could say that the sections are quite small, and so, but it's absolutely gorgeous piece of music. And I'm a huge fan of Roddy Williams.
I think we all are here.
He's done a huge amount for British music, which perhaps people are not so for. Composers like John Ireland, he's quite a specialist there.
Well, we're going to stay with the Fauré just a little longer, as David Owen Norris explores how the great composer delivered his audience into heaven and kept them there, courtesy of Chord of the Week.
Paradise, eternity. How does Fauré go about composing eternity? Well, the opposite of eternity would be a full stop, and in music, the nearest thing to a full stop is a perfect cadence. What the Americans call a full close, with that uncompromising ending C# to D. So one way of composing eternity would be to avoid C#. Fauré begins with gentle rocking chords, no hint of a C#. And then as we expect this, with a nice C#, Fauré twists aside to a C natural. More heavenly chords. And now, the obvious thing would be, but once again, Fauré sidesteps to a C natural. And when at last he does write a C#, he makes it rich and strange with a minor chord. And we arrive at eternity. Fauré sweeps us to the feet of the angels as the harps join in. It's a piece that need never end, and perhaps it's still going on somewhere.
Oh, how we've missed him. That was David Owen Norris, who will return with another Chord of the Week next Saturday. And as I said, the Fauré Prom can be found on the BBC iPlayer, but sadly not for eternity. You have been warned. So last Tuesday, the audience worshipped loudly to the sounds of saxophonist Yolanda Brown, the London Community Gospel Choir, and the London Adventist Chorale, to name but a few, because this was the night of the Gospel Prom returning to the Royal Albert Hall. Performing The Blood, that was Michelle Williams, on stage with an elite super choir made up of the very best vocalists from the top gospel choirs all around the country. And here's a fact for you all at home. The first use of the term gospel, referring to this type of music, was in 1874, a good 10 years before Fauré composed his Requiem. Fact. Now, Chi-Chi, there was a lot of joy in the hall. Do you think you need to be religious to enjoy that kind of music?
No, I don't think so. It's come from the African slave off the fields of America, where at the end of the day, people would gather and sing under trees, and they would have the sort of leader of the pack calling and answering, and coded songs of a better life, escape, deep river, steal away, all of these things. Anybody with a human heart and knowing what's behind all of this can be moved and transported.
And does gospel music move you, Julian? Did you
Yes,
enjoy it?
I went up to Harlem once and just really by chance and saw this gospel choir up there in a massive church. It was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. I mean, the passion and actually one of the things I noticed about the concert the other night, they're so together, aren't they? They are really, absolutely on the beat all the time. And I thought it was incredible. Even so many different things in that concert. And I think perhaps the thing I liked best was the vocal and the saxophone, the improvising. That was great.
And a lesson for us all, I think there isn't just one type of gospel music.
Exactly.
One of the lovely things about my job is I'm discovering some of these things at the same time as the rest of the audience. And yeah, I had a similar experience to you in New York of hearing a gospel choir and thinking, oh, this is extraordinary. But I had no idea of the variety and where the different aspects came from. I certainly didn't know the background of the text. It's a fascinating world.
And the audience clearly loved it. It was a rocking night in the Albert Hall, wasn't it? It was packed with an audience who perhaps weren't your standard Proms audience. Would you agree with that?
I think that's absolutely right. And I think those non-classical concerts that we do in the Albert Hall are a very important way of getting people into the hall to hear something like that and getting them engaged with the whole experience of live music. I mean, I met one or two people as coming to the Albert Hall as I was walking up. They'd clearly never been there before. They didn't know where they were going. And, I was sorry that they didn't know where they was going, but I was saying, yes, they're coming to this hall for the first time.
I mean, as the new director of the Proms, you are going to have to get used to this line of questioning a lot, which is when we have a themed prom, like the Gospel Prom, like the Ibiza Prom last year, the David Bowie Prom, you're going to get accused of dumbing down the Proms. How do you respond?
Well, I'm used to it already. So, a few years ago we were saying, well, it's a John Wilson orchestra here playing Gershwin. That's not classical music. Well, I think there's no dividing line between the John Wilson Orchestra and the Vienna Philharmonic. They're both absolutely at the top of their game.
You'll like that quote. I think that's absolutely right. I think that there's it is about the quality of the people that are coming in, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. Well, we had the Strictly Prom last night, which a lot of people did wonder if that would be a collision of worlds too far, but David was there. I think he may have been dancing.
I absolutely loved it. And thank you, Katie, for being a part of it and being a very important part of putting it together. But I think it's a very good example of something where, the audience last night heard music by Debussy, Khachaturian, Johann Strauss. They were hearing pieces that you would hear in a classical concert. But I bet you a lot of them had seen a television programme and now for the first time in their lives were hearing an amazing orchestra, the BBC Concert Orchestra, play this stuff. And certainly the dancers last night were thrilled to be playing with a full-sized orchestra.
It was a wonderful showcase for all the talent, I think, in the hall. I hope that the people who came for the first time will come back. I think that's the key, isn't it?
That's the key. And that's what we've got to work out, because as you say, it's no use just pulling an audience from somewhere else in and then they go back to somewhere else. And I think that's a real challenge, and I don't think we should underestimate how hard that is to do. But I'm determined that at the Proms we do what we can to address that issue.
I'm now going to be completely self-indulgent and we're going to have a look at the Royal Albert Hall from last night in full-on sparkle mode. Still see the spray tan marks on the podium if you look hard enough. If you want to see that or the Gospel Prom, they're both on the iPlayer. But that is almost it for this evening. Proms Extra and I will be back next week with a look at Tippett's A Child of Our Time and the 10 Pieces to Prom, both of which you can watch tomorrow. Very shortly, we have a performance by an instrumentalist whose world changed from schoolboy to music star in the making when he became BBC Young Musician 2016 back in May. Well, he's about to perform this evening, so it remains for me to thank my guests tonight, to Chichi Noanuku, to Julian Lloyd-Webber and David Pickard. Accompanied by his sister Isata performing Casal's Song of the Birds is Sheku Kani Mason. Goodbye.